connecting to cloud server. There we are. I'm on a laptop today, so I can't do this locally recording. Very nice to have everyone here. We do this every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is 𝗕CE office hours. We're lying today, though. This is actually 11:15 Eastern Standard Time a.m. Always excited to see Justin. I didn't know if you were joining, but wonderful to have you here. We're on office hours 16. So we're going to do it. We're going to do the fingers. We calculated this before. Let's try to get this up right. Call those fingers up. There we go, Justin. Tim, of course. Yeah. Okay. We did it. Okay. Beautiful. All right. Justin is only staying with a couple minutes, so we're going to give him, Justin, we won't do a big round of introductions. We've been doing that in the past, but Justin, we're again always grateful to have you. Anything that you're thinking right off the top?
Yeah, I mean, the big one that I'm interested in, what I've been trying to use Speak for is lives, live brainstorms. Talk about it, like a lot of the work that I do is inspired by Mark Levy's book, Accidental Genius, which was used free writing as access to the greatest thoughts. So I like the free talking aspect. And I started to experiment with Speak for Lives just to be able to surface which ideas are interesting. So I'm curious, inside of that context, I just want to share it, but like, what are some interesting use cases that you're seeing, or are you seeing people starting to use Speak for live experiences?
We've actually talked with you some little time ago, and you've mentioned that the punctuation was a very important part of it, and where not only the analysis breaks down without it, but also that with punctuation you have more just control on the output. It's actually not that we're to save it and to share it afterward. So how much of that was it is crucial to you, isn't it? The part where it's actually accurately real-time transcribed.
Yeah, it's the real-time transcription is very nice, because the real-time transcription's there right now. The issue with especially the way that I talk, it treats it as like everything that I just shared. Speak will just treat it as like one big paragraph. So I probably said, let's call it 18 segments versus things, or maybe 15 sentences. So for sentiment analysis purposes, I don't want a big chunk. I want a sentence by sentence breakdown of what we talk about. So that's why it's really important to be able to do the sentiment analysis live. So if we are in a session and we're just going live for 40 minutes, and we're like, what are the takeaways from these sessions? What do we care about? Sentiment analysis is a pretty good proxy for, like, here's the high sentiment items, here's the low sentiment items for potential follow-ups and things that we want to focus on.
How much, if I may dig down a little bit into this, I just was wondering, how do you like the line chart, or how do you see the sentiment in overall? Do you see it in a more, we tried it to emojify it, actually. We tried to put the percentages in and sort of calculate on a compound sentiment, and then we've tried giving this continuous line. How do you see sentiment analysis performing in your use cases? How do you use it? What do you use it for?
It's fine, except for the it's fine except for the punctuation piece. I mean, the other thing that I'd like to be able to extract the sentiment analysis out. The categorization's nice. And I think the categorization would work as well as a secondary, but I just find the sentiment works better than the categorization, even for me. So if I had the periods, and then I'd want to be able to extract it, because I'd want to have like, hey, this sentence is a Jira, whatever format, this is a Trello card, let's call it. This is actually in sort of this brainstorm, here's the prioritization of what we talked about, of where we should take action, which might be new features for the product, new things that we want to work on. We talk about people to reach out to that are interested. I shared Mark Levy's book, Accidental Genius, right? That might be something like, oh, I'm looking to read a new book. That's a valuable insight for people. So I'd want to be able to get them out so you could start also parsing the analysis, for future use.
I wonder how positive is the word eureka is in our data sets. Probably is high. Probably is high.
it's definitely, that's, I mean, a couple things on what Justin's talking about. I agree. And unfortunately or not, but Justin and I talk in very similar ways, just stream of consciousness, quick output, and then that sentence format breakdown, then yeah, completely destroys the power of the sentiment analysis. I'd say there's two other things that I think that we miss in a way on the sentiment analysis is, I've shown you some of those like Google Data Studio reports or just Excel reports when you add like conditional sort of formatting. So like just a little more color representation of sentiment too.
Yep.
And even the way that we display the numbers of sentiment is like the machine output. It's not really the human output. Like it's not really made for humans. We just display raw computer data, basically. So I think those would be big, big pieces for us to ask about. Use cases is a really interesting, it's an interesting company that's growing very quickly, and they're working in a couple different spaces with real-time analysis. And they're doing it with a bunch of different sensor data, working with autonomous cars, working with some pharmaceutical companies, and then also even some furniture companies that are building like personalized therapeutic sort of furniture experiences. So it's really interesting. And the part that they're trying to figure out is a mix between, I would say, like real-time, obviously the transcription, but then the goal is for them to get an output from speech in real time. And that output that they're most interested in is actually valence and arousal. So valence can be basically sentiment, and then arousal is, I guess, the intensity of that too. And so if you can output that, you can communicate with their systems and then modify lights or commands within autonomous, like within vehicles, or even they're doing some really interesting stuff in treatment and development of drugs with some of these pharmaceutical companies. So that's like, I mean, it's interesting hearing as they're deeper in, and they say that these companies invest in between something that is practical and then at the far end, which is like batshit crazy. And because they need to invest in something that can produce results that have an oversized benefit. Otherwise, it's not worth for the investment. The rest of the space is too competitive. So that's a really interesting insight, and we hope to pursue those. And there's also some VR companies that we're hoping to basically modify. Really, the goal for us is how can we create personalized environments using multimodal analysis. So again, for you, the sentiment when you're speaking there, what you're saying, but then can we add the audio analysis in real time too? And that opens up a lot of power.
I do have a use case actually that I wasn't even thinking about. So I met with somebody who's doing work with very smart people related to the UN, right? Like they get all these people together. They have a session like this. They either do it live or they do it, or they, and I don't want to step over what you said because that was super interesting, Tyler. That I was paying attention to the time. Maybe I could say this. Should I go with it? Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was just like realizing I was like 2 minutes left. So the big insight that I had, sustainability isn't just environment. That was the big insight that I had out of this conversation. Sustainability is keeping things sustainable. So we're having this conversation. There's a lot of passion. How do we keep the conversation sustainable? I think Speak is the access to be able to do that. But let me just read this here. All the ideas, people, technologies, institution, and resources that are required to achieve the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, I believe is what an SDG is, are already available. And the task is how do we engage them and combine them in new and transformational ways? My thesis is there's some mix of 5 or 10 people that can solve most problems. If you just get there and riff like you're doing, and you have the machines work in the background, like you're going to be able to solve a lot because, right, we do 300 words a minute. This is 18,000 words are going to get spoken. And how many words are in a sentence, Tim? Like 10, let's say. We're going to say 1,800 sentences in this hour period of time. And then there's also I think that is the best way to really start to solve problems if you can, start to extract that and make sense of it. So I wanted to leave with that as a drop. And I think it's very interesting. How do we command things with their voice where you were going, Tyler? But the beautiful thing about Speak is you don't even have to solve those big global issues. You're nimble enough at this point in time where you can just, pull conversations together. Tease creative.
Yeah, and Tim, that's where my mind was going too with what Tim's talking about, which is createwithvoice.com, not trademark, but an ownership of speakai.co. So we've got sort of this idea of originally what was Speak Present Mode, and we're porting that onto createwithvoice.com. And one of the things you hopefully remember, Justin, was one of the most fun things that I've done in the last while was that jam session that we did where I used Speak, and then I took the images and created like the representation of what that conversation was with all the images, and we had a couple quotes and everything. And so what we're trying to figure out to do is, how can you represent a conversation in a valuable, interactive, engaging way? And so that was like one of the ways that we sort of thought about this. Could you turn a conversation into an embeddable page, and then when you click on one of those images, it actually takes you to the exact moment in the conversation? But what Tim and I have been sort of crooking on this week has been createwithvoice.com, and what it's actually using. Tim, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about the technical terms of it without giving away too much, obviously, but you can say what you want. So say the question is like, imagine describe a mythical weird place that you would love to go and visit. So you describe that place, you speak it, and then that input will generate an image, and a completely original image for you that represents that. So it's like image generation. And the idea is, how can you just create with voice? And I think, it's a little bit of a fun experiment, but I also think there's a lot of power in describing something or saying how you feel, and then having that generated completely originally right in front of you. So very exciting.
I love it. I have to be on time for this next one, but I will come back to this piece, the 11:30, and shame on me for thinking that we could get like a 12-minute clean break coming in, but thanks a lot, guys, and I love it. I will come back and listen to it from here on the rest of the session. So thanks.
All right, it's grateful to have you here, man.
Love it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. But I love Create with Voice, and I'll check out that domain. I'll speak soon.
It's not live yet. It will come.
All right.
Timothy, go ahead. Maybe, great. Timothy, want to maybe just end, a little teaser maybe from your side on what you're thinking, then we can jump into some of the discussion points from ಮಿಹಾಲ್ and Lauren. They've been quiet so far.
No, it's just I wouldn't take much time on this, but Tyler, you've already made a great point as to Create with Voice is the way that you could express and actually feel the richness of your own speech, and at the end have that tangible output of this is it. A lot of it goes into the ether. We attempt to capture it.
The other domain I was looking for was conversations to art. Was the other one, was that idea, right? Is that we know there's a lot of these companies, and even something that we're working on is using like data to help people understand conversations or writing or sessions better. But there's also something about creating art to represent that, and the power of that, and the experience too. So
there was a website that was like that. I think I shared it a month or two ago. I think it was open source too. Like, I don't think it was like trademark, you didn't have to pay anything for it, but it was more like the tone of your voice, like as you're speaking, like on the screen, it'll paint like some sort of fractal picture, and the colors will different inflections, I suppose. So it is there, but maybe it's not like an actual like doesn't like paint like a landscape or anything specific, which just kind of has abstract art kind of, I guess.
I remember you sharing that. It was like a research project, and they did have some. I'll see if we can find that and link that. It was really, I shouldn't swear, but cool. And those are we've talked about. ಮಿಹಾಲ್ asked me yesterday about Tyler, what are the dreams and goals, and then obviously what are the short-term things that help you unlock that. But when I look at Speak and what the ideal, what the dream was, and what the vision was, to create these meaningful experiences through interactive voice, and I hope that we can still bring that together. And that's why I love these side projects with Timothy, and the fact that we have a team who's all interested in this stuff while taking care of the day-to-day business the way that we need to. So Lauren, you are off mute. What you had a topic that you wanted to talk about here today. So do you want to set that up at all, and we
Sure,
can chat?
yeah. It's also kind of somewhat similar to what the problem that Justin was running into, where he has like a long run-on sentence, so you can't really analyze there. I just want to bring up possibilities with like hardware integrations with Speak, just because we're looking into like this effective computing market, which I think we are pretty closely aligned to. But like a big section of that is actually like hardware. So we've been playing with hardware quite a bit in the past. We had that Muse, someone gave a nice little gift there. I'm not sure if it's still around or not, but what I wanted to ask Justin, and maybe after he sees this video, we can bring it up too, is that also with like transcribers, they'll have like their pedal to like say like pause or reverse the actual the video in order to transcribe and keep along with it. I was wondering if there's anything out there available for when he is talking and he's going on his long rants. If you were to hit a button, that's kind of like a stop sentence or stop paragraph and move on to the next one. Maybe that could be something pretty simple. Maybe just like a little like hand button that you, like a rope or something that just like, okay, that's a thought. Next one. So just curious. Like also, Tim and 𝗏𝗲𝗁 have their Oura rings. But I'm not sure what they can do with that as far as speak goes. And even 𝗏𝗏𝗁 brought up some sort of hardware yesterday. He posted something there as well. So just curious what you guys have to think about that.
If I may just on the Aura, actually have to debunk it. Unfortunately, they don't support real-time anything. They only work because of the battery constraints. So the real-time actually would only be able to do that with Apple Watch or something, or alternative, not Apple, us, but yep.
And you actually can with the Oura Ring, if you enter into a partnership or engagement with them, they have a different type of Oura Ring device that can stream in real time. Athletes are using it, like professional athletes in sports are using it. It's very, very interesting stuff. So yeah,
can we get that crazy partnership, please?
We're trying, we're working on it.
There.
Yeah, we're working on it. But the Oura Ring is really fascinating. And last session, 𝗏𝗁 brought up his life.𝗏𝗁_𝗨𝗽. I hope I quoted that right. But basically, he's just on a daily, I believe a daily refresh, just pulling in all the data from Oura Ring. And like the one part is the hardware, but really it's just the data output that you can get from that hardware. So now, if 𝗏𝗁 was, for example, writing text notes within Speak or speaking and capturing conversations, and that was done in a rigorous enough way, you could align the Oura Ring data with those instances. And there's some gaps. I'm sure Tim probably is thinking of some breakdowns there, especially if you don't have the timestamps of when the data is coming in. But there's a lot of work of like the idea that some of these healthcare companies are trying to do is take like Oura Ring or a similar device like Apple or Google and say, okay, for example, a therapy session started here. And at the same time, they started an audio or video recording. And now they're trying to align, for example, heartbeats per minute or, I don't know what other metrics you're thinking of there, Tim, and literally aligning that with what they're saying. And then if they can get enough of those, a clean enough data set from enough people, there could be some really interesting, ideally some sort of correlation or connections found between that objective measure of heartbeats per minute and what's being said in that session. Very interesting stuff, very hard, like not an easy, easy thing to do. And these are big, complex problems that people are trying to solve, but just between what Tim said there, Oura, Google, Apple, some amazing applications of combining that with Speak.
And another problem that came up, we've talked about this multiple times already, but with the whole Muse headband where it's the EEG, like it's tracking all the electrical outputs of your brain while you're meditating or talking or whatnot. We're thinking of integrating that with like speech to text, stuff like that. But the problem is that it can't pick up your brain waves as well when you're talking, kind of like mashes up the signal. I'm just curious, what if you don't talk at all? What if you're just writing instead? Would that still affect the signals in any way?
That's a great point. The person who told me that was Heather Hargraves, who's an incredible neurofeedback specialist and has done a lot of work with EEGs, and basically said, yeah, when you speak, your head is vibrating too much for the signal to be picked up cleanly, which makes sense. So I'm just wondering, if you're writing, are you creating enough vibrations that it's also creating that creating dirty data through that signal?
Yeah, you're shaking your body too much from actually typing or writing.
It's mostly in an EEG situation, like with the Muse device or with in a more commercial or academic one. I believe, my understanding is that you're mostly laying down and laying still to get that clean signal. I don't know, Tim, I know you have more, not more interest. I'm as interested in that stuff, but maybe a little bit more insight into that. Not sure if there's anything you're thinking there.
not exactly to the point, but I'm just thinking of in parallel here with in a more, no, not to the point. So I'm not gonna derail this.
It's okay, Timothy. The only other things that I'm thinking about, Lauren, from the hardware perspective, or you said wearables, but then there's hardware. Like, what's really interesting, that company that we talked to, they've got the companies are coming to them already with the hardware and then telling them, what sensors or what data they're able to output. But then a lot of these companies are looking to invest in contactless experiences too, especially with COVID, and thinking of how can we make things touch free. And even you were talking about Justin with that button. Ideally, we figure out how to do automatic punctuation, so it is the whole experience is hands free. It'd be odd to be like hitting a button every time you're trying to time, a sentence, a sentence end. The only part
it's like tapping your head and rubbing your body.
It's weird. I can't do that for sure. That's I look like an idiot.
Do we have that? Was it from what was the company? I wasn't alive when they built that big button. They sold it in supermarket, and when you hit it, it would say that was easy.
Staples,
something like that. That was easy, and we need to incorporate with them about that hardware.
You're calling us all old, is what you're doing right now. That dated us. That hurt. That was like not that long ago. I feel like
I missed that part, but there is.
No, go ahead.
Well, with punctuation part, actually, there are companies who are sure, it's not a problem to say that Google actually had moved from experimental feature of punctuation to actually release. You can now, anyone with an API access on their Google Cloud platform can, so I've been experimenting with that. And we're just to the topic of create with voice still, so it's like a two-stage process. When you're trying to formulate a sentence, articulate it, and it's still compounds until you actually pause, and that's a non it's not exactly usable in like I wouldn't imagine Justin to pause to wait until it's finished. So the button sounds like a good idea to actually have that hard separation, but also in terms of I'm thinking in your awareness, like what is most important? You can't interpret magnetic resonance data, for example. You can't interpret it live unless there is something like a simplification mechanism that actually tells you whether you're aroused or not, or whatever you can actually inference from it. And it's not too much on its own. You need to have the correlations built around all the other data points that actually will make sense to you in terms of real-time self-analysis. That is, in these terms, it's not as straightforward. Plus, the fact that we still need to build so much of the contextual information and understanding of the user's brainwaves, for example, we still have to spend like well, I'm not going to say time period because I'm not aware of that, but we need to spend time training on a user's brain first, and that's inevitable. And without it, the data is noise. So why did I say that? Okay, let's move on.
The only thing I'll add is like the most rudimentary thing that I told Michal yesterday too, that also like one of the dreams is that we could actually run that on device locally. You know what I mean? Is basically not have to send that to the cloud. Just thinking about, privacy, thinking about the transfer of data. Like the dream for myself, what I would love to see one day is just like local speech to text that's accurate and trainable, that can be done in real time with 0 to low latency, and then also multimodal analysis being done. So that's the dream. We're working on it. It's gonna. Michal, you've been so quiet. Let's go, buddy. It's your turn here. Let's talk about what you want to talk about.
Well, I was actually going to ask, when it comes to hardware integration, for instance, if it involved some level of like speech to text, right? The quality of the microphone and the microphone's ability to pick up what you're saying accurately would definitely, that's like a pretty major blocker, right? For any speech to text integration, or are kind of consumer goods mics good enough
Yeah.
to do that?
And just like where
accurately?
you are when you're
Mhm.
talking to
Different parts of the
like,
room. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, if in a crowded place or if you
Yeah.
have some sort of like editing too afterwards, that helps quite a bit.
Hmm.
That's even like I'm on my laptop today, so I'm sending like a degraded signal of sound compared to the normal microphone that I have, and that has an impact too. And like one of the companies that reached out to us recently also just asked, like, what is the best file format to have? So a WAV is much better than an MP3 because you've done lossless. You have a lossless audio format. So there's a lot of things to think of there. I think from most of the research and work that's been done shows consistently that like multimodal analysis is the most valuable. So say like the idea there is that you're combining what's being said and how it's being said, because and between the two of those, you can increase the chance of accuracy, even if, for example, speech to text is degraded in quality based on where you are in the room or something. However, I think there's still a lot of gaps there, and not everyone is sitting in a perfectly idealized, no noise environment with a perfect microphone streaming in perfect quality. So there's a lot of challenges there. And I think it also comes down to, like for some people, this is a beautiful thing. Oh, wow, that's just joining. For some people, it's like a beautiful thing to think of this like machine that understands you in real time and then can trigger changes. For other people, that's a nightmare. So also have to consider that. However, I do like, Lauren, I do appreciate that you brought up the effective computing part, which is an amazing market that will continue to grow, and it's not going to stop. Whether it's vehicles trying to create, like there are vehicles now that are modifying the environment of your car as you're driving based on what not just what you're saying, but even facial recognition. That's what 𝗕𝗏𝗄𝗏 is doing a lot of great work on, and like it or not, that technology is going to come, and we will all be sitting in our own personalized little bubbles or environments, navigating through the world.
But also kind of scary, like who else is going to have access to your car? Like maybe you commit a crime. I'm not saying what kind of crime it is, but maybe you get into your car to get away, and it's like, oh, you're on the police register now. We just took a picture of your face and we locked your car. Just curious to see what could happen there.
The other one, the bigger application, and hey, 𝗲𝗀𝗄, nice to see you. Well, nice to, you're here. I can't see you yet or hear you, but nice that you're here. Is like the big one that they've tried. They always start with small applications, right? Is if they can tell that your eyes are closing, like basically that you're sleeping, and you can get like a beep or alert or a vibration or something like that. So it starts with small, but then things expand very quickly. And it does come to this idea of technology sort of surveilling at all time and hopefully helping, but other ramifications, as you just mentioned. 𝗲𝗀𝗄, got a new background.
Hello.
Looking
yes,
fresh, buddy.
I got to
just working on a couple of things. Just late.
It's okay. We had Justin on for a bit at the start. He hopped in and hopped out. We've had a good discussion so far. I think we're at I don't even know. I've lost track. I've lost track of what it was, but it was a good conversation. It's 𝗲𝗏𝗏's turn. We're doing a nice little circle here about some of the topics that we want to talk about. So 𝗲𝗏𝗏's been quiet most of the time here, so we're giving him a chance to share anything that he wants to.
So I'm at the beach, so that's cool.
There you go, buddy.
The kind of topic I wanted to discuss was I titled it as press versus product, and like why making the news doesn't always mean success. And this was kind of just inspired by the fact that we recently had a pretty big, pretty significant partnership with MindCure. Had our our website, our company name distributed across like syndicated websites, and we didn't really see any significant results from that exposure, for instance, right? And that kind of got me thinking about how just getting into the news and like good PR isn't necessarily a surefire way to success if people don't actually convert and don't actually start using what you're offering, right? And in our particular case, it could just be that it was very much an informational touch point. Like it's not a, hey, come try speak, right? It was just like, hey, we're working on this cool project with this upcoming company, right? And it it got me thinking, and it's cool that in a way that we haven't fallen into this trap yet, but it's like, I think there's a point in time where many early stage or even larger companies like let fame almost get to their heads, and to the point where they'll stop focusing on what got them there. They'll stop focusing on their users' needs and their users' issues. And in a way, it's almost like a blessing in disguise where we haven't necessarily had that problem just yet. But I think that's also empowered us, and also for the engineering team to just focus on what's most important, right? Instead of trying to please investors or trying to please like a news cycle, like whatever it is. And as like a third point, it also just kind of got me thinking about first impressions and how it's usually hard to recover from a bad first impression, whether that's on the product side, personal, professional, whatever it is. And so it's important to not really go too hard on artificially promoting your product when your product's not necessarily ready to be promoted to maybe that specific set of users, right? So right now, you'll see like Otter, for instance, after that huge round of funding they got, right? Like I see their paid ads everywhere, right? And it's just like that's cool and all, and it's cool that they've figured out, they found the product market fit, and they're just driving as much cash as they can behind getting their product into as many people as possible. But in a way, that's not really where we're at just yet. And making that good first impression is going to be like super important for us, regardless of user touch points as well. Yeah. And I guess just your thoughts, you guys have been with the company for quite a bit longer than I have. And what are some things you've maybe noticed over time, for instance, when Speak does get some exposure, or when you get to talk about Speak, and how are you positioning Speak during these conversations, and have you ever seen positive trends after certain rounds of exposure, for instance?
Sure. There's always like a big jump in user signups, at least. I'm not entirely sure how that affected retention in the past. Probably as the product becomes more matured and more developed out, as you said, when we actually go for those large campaigns, those large announcements over whatever website, it's probably going to be a bit more important. Like, it's great. It's definitely like an ego boost when you're in the early stages of, oh, we just launched this and it's on this website and we got these many users. But maybe we bring in users, maybe we advertise those users too soon, and then they come in and it's like, oh, this isn't really ready yet. And then they leave and kind of forget about it until the next time there's a news broadcast or whatever. So yeah, there's probably some more. You could probably think about it more, probably strategize a bit more about when to have those press releases. But I think the more press, the better in a way. I don't know. I'm not in advertising or marketing though. I'm an accountant, so that's just my 2 cents.
I add, a couple boost in signups, but doesn't necessarily mean they're the right people. A couple of them have actually been at virtual events where we were mentioned, or even within a chat, the name was mentioned, people come to the site, and because it's a free sign up, willing to do a test. Doesn't mean they're the right user, doesn't mean they're the right customer, doesn't mean they're ever willing to, pay for the product, but they see that there's a low friction point for them to just see. So I do think there is validity about the first impression, and also creating, improving the onboarding experience, which is something that we've been talking about, and, looking at that usability and trying to increase retention. The other part is, I think, and this is partly my fault, is, talking about the wide range of potential that's possible for technologies like ours. For example, the one that sticks out to me right now is Nest Labs. We did an interview with Nest Labs, and she has a huge conscious productivity hacker community, about 30,000 people. And when she posted an article on there, I was talking a lot about how you could upload files, and then over time you can start to identify patterns and things like that. So people come in from those signups really looking for and I would say a consumer-friendly product that allows them to track behavior or productivity or mood, and then not necessarily the product doesn't deliver on that. Or in my case, it did, but that was a lot of configuration and conceptual understanding and hacking our own system together to make that work. So I think there's been, I wouldn't say false expectations set up, but I think just some of the things that we're discussing theoretically and conceptually of what technology can do and then where the product is are different. And it's hard when you have a small team where you're like talking about what you want to do, and then you're always 6 months ahead in your mind than where you are with what you're doing. I just add one other part is like from the press release part. Oh, hey, buddy. From the press release part, I've been following specifically, I mean, many technology companies, but obviously the psychedelic space. And a lot of companies are, because, for example, this specific market, they're a ways from monetization and legalization and even having something, but they're trying to create milestones that they can put press releases out. And there's been jokes about how weak some of these milestones are. So one of the milestones famously was someone bought a website domain and put a press release about buying a website domain, right? So it's like these things are very shallow surface levels. And I think that you've sort of illuminated on 値hal is like behind the scenes, we've created a system that works and can actually create value. And it's allowed us to create focus because we're not spending all our time just hitting artificial milestones. And I think that's been powerful of being a private focused company, and it's put us into a good spot. I think, you know, as we move forward, we can look at some of those opportunities, but I know it's not always as good on the outside as those press releases are compared to what happens. So
I also want to add the beautiful thing about press releases, especially when you're a startup, is they don't cost anything, which is really nice because advertising is very expensive.
The press releases that these companies are sending are very expensive, though. They're using Cision to post them, and I don't know, 値hal, if you have the exact figures on those, but they're expensive. And what the biggest outcome that I've seen from them, from some talks, but then also some hooking into understanding of marketing websites, is like a lot of them don't actually drive any traffic or even visits to the site. The biggest benefit is actually getting domain authority from those sites because it's like a highly trusted site. So for us, even we've seen a little bit of a boost because we were included in those press releases that our site is more trustworthy or spread across the web. And that's the bigger benefit than I would even say the traffic part that we're seeing and a lot of companies are most likely seeing.
I just want to share our numbers, a few numbers, if you allow me to share a screen, which might make okay, Tal is trying to share allow me to share a screen here.
You're good. I have no mouse pad or no key mouse, so
Okay.
my finger was wet.
So 値hal, these are the numbers I just found from our how many users we onboard each month. And if you see the outliers, let's say a month September, around 90, and like in the October 100 plus. So I don't know if you connect the dots and if you look at back, is like what happened in October or November. Sorry, in November it's 100 plus, not October. But like let's say November, or like why is this consistent, or why this outliers maybe. What it comes to my mind, the first thing is we do have this indie hacker interview, or Tyler had in a couple of interviews before in the news that can be the social media trends or tweets that also triggers the sign up. So how do you connect when the press release or the social media comments or the interviews are different? As like, is that necessary to have the press releases? That's my question, is like, or if you are engaged, let's say we heard a lot about when it's like, oh, before launch a product, engage with the group, engage with the Facebook group, or engage with your own community and see how does that work to the same funder, right? The goal is same, the approaches are different. So how do you see, is like, I mean, why do, it's like that is an optional, or that is a mandatory even for the companies to need to do their press releases?
Like, are you asking if there's value in them?
Sort of, yes, because let's say if the social media interviews, if you are in the interviews, And you also see the trends. You are creating the authority. You are creating that sort of a responsibility in the market.
Mhm. I think the number one thing I learned, for instance, in PR school was if you're going to go out to journalists or if you're going to put out a press release, like you need to make sure that it's actual news, right? Like that it's actually something worth talking about, because journalists get bombarded with 100 to 200 pitches a day. Half the time people like Tyler said, right? Hey, we bought a new domain. Do you want to write about us? Right. So I think press releases have a very specific use case to kind of just disseminate information across a wide variety of websites and channels. But I think the other approach that you were talking about, like the more community building, community involvement, actually being an active member in the the spaces you're trying to serve. I think in the long term, short and long term, like that'll provide many more dividends than something like a press release, right? Because in those situations, you're definitely being more of a once again, that way you kind of get to position yourself as a thought leader as well within a space. Versus, I think press releases are just a lot of times are just egotistic little acts, right?
One thing I found was really interesting to me was that a lot of times journalists don't even, or some of these places, they don't even write, like you're responsible for writing the press release. You just give them a prepackaged asset and they just do a check if this is, maybe they do a little rewrite or edit, but it's just like you're prepackaging it for it. They want it to be this easy activity. Generally, I think we get bombarded with milestones that are money raised. So how much money you raised, and if it's a large point, like 𝗕𝗏, great company in Toronto, just raised, I believe, $100 million and became Canada's new unicorn, right? So there's the news, there's the press release, very exciting. And I think or patents, but the thing that I also think it becomes, and I've talked to someone who actually was in a company growing quite quickly who used a lot of press releases and talked about it creates, part of that is the purpose, but a perspective or a thought of the company that doesn't always align with reality. So great, you just raised, for example, $30 million or whatever, but what did you have to give up for that $30 million? What, raising the money is not the goal. Raising the money is a means to an end to help you get to where you need to go. It's not just, so in a way that in our lives has been this, sort of building these shiny spectacles that we can all share. The same thing happens with press releases and milestones, even if it's not necessarily the the accurate perception or what's actually happening. So we want to, I think, we can continue to go through there. I think we talked about the authority. When you read something about someone on a different site than themselves, like instead of going to 𝗦𝗏𝗏.co and reading something that we wrote, reading it on another website creates this sense of trust or credibility or authority. And that is one of the main drivers of why companies are doing that. And I think generally a lot of the companies are public companies or companies moving towards trying to increase the valuation of their companies. So they're also trying to get into the eyes of investors who are following those news and looking for data points for creating value within companies too. Good. Okay. Do you feel satisfied, Nihal?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool.
I'm also just trying to be mindful of the time.
Yeah, I know.
You guys
Yeah.
have your meeting after as
well. We got Tim and 𝗏𝗏𝗁 who are left to speak or who want to share. 𝗏𝗏𝗁, you had
Go ahead.
Thank you for the honors, but I would say that I've already took enough time with the Create with Voice. Really excited about that stuff. Well, if to actually riff off of this topic of some of the things that I saw and I still see in many companies, and I'm not talking about 𝗦𝗏𝗏𝗏 AI. is where most of the progress and resources and funding investments of any sort is coming from not necessarily the stakeholders to which you were aimed in the first place. Sort of the definition of the value that the product creates is not exactly defined by everyone. It's defined by a very small group of people. And in this building the strategy around actually incorporating all of these investments and at the same time aiming at that group of people, the very same one, is so hard to accomplish. This alignment is strategy. And this product strategy is really should be ignored at times, because in a startup environment, it's sales led. Otherwise, it's not anyhow else. But when it is so, this difficulty becomes the challenge that startups need to. It's the hill that we need to climb up to, and that is an ongoing challenge that we're seeing too. We're seeing that we want to serve that group of people. We're seeing that we want to know who those people are in the first place, and we've done a fantastic job so far with our website and positioning it in the web space, and seeing this discrepancy between expectations and real people we have on our platform is very exciting in its own way. So I wouldn't spend much time here on this, but figuring out this alignment and still is the most crucial part everyone on the team, I'm sure, is looking forward to.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and I think, it's interesting, right? You're optimizing for, depending on the path of the company you're going, right? If you're bootstrapping and you're only growing off customer sales, you're only focused on customer sales and the revenue that's generated. Otherwise, you will die very quickly. Whereas there's other companies that are taking a venture funded path. And so they're not only optimizing for customer success, they're optimizing for investment success. They're operating for milestones within 6 to 12 to 18-month periods. And if you have the right people on board, those can align really nicely. But then sometimes you see the opposite, which they're not necessarily that aligned. So yeah, continuing to explore that. And that's always, even just a quick example, even in Canada, there's lots of grants, there's lots of tax credits, but even putting someone to take care of that takes away from the capacity of, for example, talking to a customer, talking to a user, building a better customer success pipeline. So everything's a trade-off, and you're always spending your efforts and time on one audience compared to another. Very fascinating thing, and a delicate balance that I think many companies are trying to figure out. So that's all. We're coming up towards the end of time here, but we'd love to touch on your topic here. Leon had a great topic too, but is not here, so we'll leave that for him here. But let's anything that you're thinking on your side for today.
The couple of things I learned throughout the process, and what I see, what I learned, what I read from other companies. What one thing I understand is, like, the problem is unique. Otherwise, everyone gonna work on the same problem. So the problem is unique, and if the questions is unique, the solutions, the approaches, you just cannot replicate, or it is not the same answers you can write in the different questions. If the questions is about how the definitions of the innovations, or maybe the definitions of the strategy, those are the two different questions. You cannot just write the same answer under those questions. So my point I wanted to talk about is, so when you start a company, if you're in the early stage, the scenario is if you don't have enough data about what exactly the user segment is, the market is. We are not talking about 𝗨𝗊𝗏, I'm talking about in general. But if you're listening, and it's like if you're in the early stage company, the question sometimes stuck is like, should we wait for the more data, or and like how do you make the crucial decision throughout the process? So that's a question I want to put on the table, and it's like anyone can take on. But the question is like, it is. I read a thread on the Twitter that was one from the genius from the California, and he talked about the same sentiment about what are the things you do when you don't have enough data and you still want to run a company, and because you believe, you have that faith about your idea and you see these problems, but sometimes it takes time to get that level, but you know that you have the key to open the door, but sometimes it's just stuck in that position and you can't open the door. So I know I put a lot of analogy here, but the point around is, when you don't have enough data about, you can say about the user or maybe the feedback, and you still needs to move, you just still needs to do more experiments. You just cannot sit and think about or say about the ideas or analogies like, oh, you know what, let's do this or that. But what I learned through the study is like, you just need to do the experiment, you need to implement something, you need to learn through the process. Otherwise, there is no way around you can learn. So yeah, I will take a pause, but that's a question.
I'll revert to a couple of things that so ideally, even if you look at starting like the lean startup idea, right, is that
Yes.
you go out and you interview 20 people in your target customer, and they don't tell you to go interview one person, because that's not enough. So there's like, I go back to even advertising. Like if I was to run a Google ad campaign or a Facebook campaign or something, there'd always be a baseline of impressions or clicks before you would even feel confident in making a decision whether that ad was worth it, and you should double down on that ad or you should kill that ad, basically. And I think that's the same thing that we need to do here. And like we talked about a little bit of like, doing some work to test some of the messaging on our homepage. But it was like, at first, I think we need to get more people to the homepage, and then we can start to do those tests. And I hope this isn't maybe the full satisfying answer that you're looking for, but when you don't have enough quantitative data, then you do need to move towards some of the qualitative information that you get to. So the example that I'm thinking of is like, say you do only interview one person, you could only get one person to respond to you. Throughout that whole interview, though, there were some moments that you could really sense the pain or how tough that problem was. Like that's a qualitative moment that you can pull out even with not that much quantitative data. And I would say like from a system like Hotjar or LogRocket, where you can see sessions of how people are interacting with your website, maybe you only have 10 website visits, but if you go and watch those recordings, you can understand a lot very quickly.
Right.
So I don't know if that progressed this conversation anyway, but just
no, that makes sense. For example, what you give an example about the marketing, and if you see the ads are working or not working, what do? You just sit there and see that's going to work in next week, or do you make changes in the images or the messaging, or how do you manage that? So that's a sort of a same fundi. It's like you do the experiments that can be in any fields, even the scientific research too. It's like they start with the hypothesis, but they will go with this different experiment. So
yeah, I think this one's probably more abstract, but a lot of people, including myself, I know Tim too, like you're testing even, for example, diet, what you're eating and how you're eating. And so sometimes you can't even say like statistically, this, but you can also just ask yourself, does this make me feel better? Too, like there is some feel, that's why companies are successful. That's why leaders are successful, is that they have an intuition as well, beyond, of course, the data that you collect and the hard work that you understand. You have to know, you have to feel. Timothy says it's fun when you don't trust yourself. And
That's a thing. That's
yeah.
a huge difference, right? So for what that's create the whole difference. So I do have a couple of threads. I just want to say here, and this is one very beautiful. It says, if you run a startup or an early stage company, think like a scientist who favor humility over pride and curiosity over conviction. So it's like, I'll repeat again, it's like, think like a scientist who favor humility over pride and curiosity over conviction. So they are not trying to convince you, and it's like there's no conviction there, but the curiosity is there. And this is the last one, is early stage startups need just two type of hires. Early stage startups just need two type of hire. One is builders and second is sellers. And everything will work out. And after that, you can keep growing your team, putting people in the different segments and let them run the SEEP.
Well, you built quite of a library in the background over there.
Yeah. No, I think that's it. Early stage company. You're either building or you're selling. And it's interesting. I think we've got a very multidisciplinary team, which can have a lot of positives, but I think there's also, we all do a lot of different things, and sometimes that dilutes our efforts and our focus, and I think there's also, to date, there's still a lot of work that gets done that then when something comes in, that there's a lot of management of that. So part of it comes into, I guess, what we've talked about is when an enterprise deal comes in, then there's a lot of success or customer success that goes into it, where you're managing the success of that client or customer, and you're not necessarily then focused on net new lead generation or creating new sales. And I think that's a chasm that we're still definitely trying to overcome, which is, in some ways our website will drive signups and leads. We're making some modifications to that we'll probably discuss in a future episode. But at the same time, there's more of an ongoing outreach that's needed, or an ongoing selling and sales prospecting system that needs to be built. We've got some great developers. We've got a great base foundation. Of course, we know that there's things that we need to improve, but when you break it down to be that simple, it's pretty obvious what you've got to do.
It's wonderful.
Good way to end it, 𝗲𝗁. Anyone else have anything? We've gone for time here. Anything else before we end? This is office hour 16, guys. So this is we've made it. We got the fingers right up at the start, 𝗲𝗁. We did it right, so that was great. Felt very impressed with the team. Anything else, guys? Okay,
we're good. It's lots of content in this one.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of the day. I'm going to talk to you soon, probably, I'm sure. But thanks for joining in as always, and appreciate you all bringing a topic. That was a wonderful way to do it today. Okay.
Thank you so much, Owen.
Bye.